Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this inaugural Bill Williams Memorial Debate. I'm Sue Wareham, President of Medical Association for Prevention of War, and I want to welcome all of you very warmly, those of you here in person and those of you who are joining us online from around the country. The event is in honour of a much-loved peace activist, Bill Williams, who's no longer with us in person, but is with us in spirit on very many occasions, including this evening, when we discuss the topic, is it ethical for universities to invest in or work with companies that manufacture weapons? And I'd like to extend a particular welcome to Bill's wife, Gisela Gardner, who we're delighted is able to join us this evening. I'll begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and land on which many of us here present live and work, the Wurundjeri people of the Wurrung language group in the Kulin Nation. And we pay our deep respects to them, remembering that their land was taken violently from them as it was taken violently from First Nations people around the country. Our organisation, MAPW, is an organisation of health professionals from all disciplines of health. We work for a reduction of armed conflict and the harms that it causes on human health and the environment. And we particularly work for the elimination of all nuclear weapons. Bill played a key role in our organisation, so just a very few words about him. He was a graduate of Melbourne University, Victorian born and bred. As a student, he travelled and worked fairly widely in Africa and in Latin America, subsequently worked in the UK and in various roles in Australia, including for most of the 1990s, and on and off since. Bill worked in Kintore in the Western Desert in the Northern Territory. And Bill was held in such high respect by the people there that when he died in 2016, 18 of his Pintupi family from Kintore travelled to pay their respects to him. After Kintore, Bill settled into life as a GP at Torquay, near his beloved ocean. He was a long-term member of MAPWA, served as national president, and in 2006, Bill was part of a core group within MAPW who founded ICAN, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. And Bill and Gisela travelled widely in Europe promoting this fledgling campaign, which was pivotal in achieving the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in 2017, an event which Bill did not quite live to see. He died in 2016 in his sleep, aged just 57. Bill was a man of many skills and interests, including writing. He had several books published, and he's remembered for very many things. His wisdom, his down-to-earth good sense, his very clear communication, his sense of fun, and his deep sense of humanity, and we miss him greatly. I have just a very few photos of Bill. That's Bill. That's actually Pine Gap. This is 2002. Bill's waiting to tell the media about the role that Pine Gap plays in nuclear warfare. This is 2006 or 7, the commencement of the ICAN campaign. Two very happy people at Kintore, NT. This is why Bill wanted to live at Torquay. His great passion, one of his top passions, was surfing. And this one, excuse the pun here, I'm sorry, I actually think it's pretty terrible myself, but Bill dressed as a kangaroo, the eye kangaroo to be precise, with a nuclear umbrella outside Flinders Street. So that's one of our fond memories of Bill. Okay. More seriously, the reason for choosing this subject this evening is that in working to reduce the harms of war, we have to ask who profits when nations go to war. MAPWA is not a pacifist organisation, but we have to, the notion of companies actually profiting when millions of people are subject to the inhumanities of warfare, raises serious ethical issues, which we'll be examining this evening. And over the past year, you're all painfully aware that we've watched horrific suffering as a result of a high-tech military machine created by the weapons industry. But this issue goes far beyond any one war zone. MAPWA has documented the impact of the weapons industry intruding into primary schools, primary and secondary schools, and this evening we're looking at universities. This event was always planned as a debate so that different perspectives could be presented on the question before us. We invited 3 of Melbourne University's Deputy Vice-Chancellors. We invited Michael Wesley, Pip Nicholson and Mark Cassidy, either to speak or, if they were unavailable, to send a proxy speaker. They were not available. They did not respond to the invitation to send a proxy speaker. We invited them to send a statement, which we would be happy to read out to the meeting, and they have not taken up that invitation. Therefore, we cannot have a proper formal debate, but nevertheless, we intend to address this question from different perspectives, and that will be the task for our panel in a moment, whom I am now delighted to introduce. Our chair for this evening is Tanya Miletic, who is the co-director of Melbourne University's Initiative for Peacebuilding. Tanya is a very experienced peace and conflict studies academic and practitioner with a commitment to working collaboratively to translate research into policy and practice in conflict prevention and peacebuilding. And she's worked with a wide range of government and non-government organisations on these matters. At the other end, Hadrien Moffroid is a recent University of Melbourne graduate, having completed his concurrent Doctor of Medicine and Master of Public Health in 2023. Hadrien now works at the Royal Melbourne Hospital as an intern. And he joined the Health Students Association for Prevention of War, which comprises MAPWA's student and early career members. And that group was formed early this year, and Hadrien was part of the formation of that group. Moving along, Liz Strakosch is a senior lecturer in politics at University of Melbourne, working on racism and colonialism in public policy. Liz is involved in anti-racist advocacy through a number of institutions, including the Jewish Council of Australia, which formed in February this year to provide an alternative Jewish perspective, supporting Palestinian justice and liberation. Next in the seating order is Tilman Ruff, AO. Tilman is an immediate past co-president and is a current board member of IPPNW International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War. Tilman was the co-founder and founding chair internationally and in Australia of ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. And Tilman is a current committee member of ICAN Australia and an honorary principal fellow in the School of Population and Global Health at this university. And lastly, but by no means least at all, is Hadil Albarqi, who is a Palestinian who grew up in Gaza. Hadil trained as a pharmacist. She did her master's in public policy and management at this university. Hadil now works in the Aboriginal health sector, and she's passionate about social justice and equality and inclusion. We're delighted to have such a panel. Just a couple of announcements. You would have seen on the introductory slide, and information was emailed about submitting questions, all questions for this evening, and please have them mulling over in your brain and send them in. All questions must be submitted via the Slido app, and there is a password available there. And finally, please turn down your phones if you haven't done. So thank you all, and it's my great honour and pleasure to hand over to Tanya and to our panel for the discussion.
Thank you, Sue, and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sue, for bringing build spirit for robust and constructive engagement issues into the room. And thank you to our panelists for joining us. I think we got a bit of a sense of why you might be on the panel from your introductions, but we want to start with a chance to get a sense of your perspective and your view on this question of whether it is ethical for universities to work with or to invest in and engage with Australian universities. And I might ask each of you to be brief, because we'll have a chance to have other questions that allow us to deliberate and go further. But Hadil, welcome. And yes, what's your view and your position on this?
Hello everyone. Thanks for being with us tonight. Thanks, Annie, for your question. I guess like the first thing is, it's funny that we asked this question today after what's been happening in Gaza. Yeah. And for me, definitely my position is, I think that for any university to be engaged in like or partner with companies that manufacture weapons, definitely unethical and not justifiable in any way. And I guess like university by doing this is just become complicit in all the crimes that are committed using these weapons. We just want to be part of killing and destroying people's lives. And the fact that when we look at how these weapons are being used, it's like they always end up in the hands of bad people, bad governments and entities that mainly use them just to oppress people, suppress them, destroy their lives. And I don't think universities want to be part of something like that. I don't think, if you want to be part of something like that, I don't know what kind of message they're sending to the students, to the academic staff, to their partners. Is it that it's okay? The message is it's okay as long as we make profit, we receive funds, we're not negatively impacted. So yeah, it's okay to be part of destroying others' lives.
Thanks, Hadil. And Tilman, you've been in conversations with the university for some time. Could you share a little bit about your view on this?
I was really got involved with this when I was really disappointed and challenged by the university's very bold and proud announcement of the partnership with Lockheed Martin to establish the first major research hub for that company in Australia back in 2016. And it was lauded as a major initiative, as the university leads to a position to assist Lockheed Martin achieve their goals. That was the explicit word that the Vice Chancellor Research at the time used in the public statement. Lockheed Martin is the world's largest weapons company by a long shot. It has a very long and dark history of bribery and serious corruption that challenged the royal family in Belgium and resulted in the loss of government just about, and a very serious history of bribery and corruption of a very high level. And it manufactures nuclear weapons for both the United States and the Kingdom. And it also, at that time already, still was not renouncing work on lethal autonomous weapon systems, which have become more prominent and around which there's been more international efforts to proactively control those before they deploy at scale or apply to nuclear weapons or other indiscriminate and inhumane weapons. Very destructive potential. So I was really disappointed by that, and there's been a long history of staff and students at the university and the UPW folk more generally, seeking to engage with the university at the level of the departments, particularly engineering and physics, involved. The Chancellery, with the responsible people for Palestinian decisions about research in the university with deans. That process has been extremely frustrating in the lack of transparency and accountability. Really, any explanation as to how that decision, just referring to that example that applies to others, how those decisions were made, who made them, for what reasons, and what exactly was agreed. What's the deal? What's being worked on by whom, under what circumstances, for what purpose, for how long, for how much money, who's managing, who's got the oversight, how are the risks being considered and addressed. None of that information has ever become public about either the partnership with Lockheed Martin, or as far as I'm aware, with any other of the major military companies that the university has connections with. So both in terms of the substance of the collaboration, and this is the university that, you know, at the time in 2016 and 17 was quite pleased and proud to promote its association with the founding of the International Campaign for Abolition of Nuclear Weapons, and to claim some sharing, some pride in the first Nobel Peace Prize awarded to an Australian-born entity for a treaty banning the worst of all weapons of mass destruction. And at the same time, collaborating with a major manufacturer of those same weapons, the treaty that the Nobel Prize was awarded for, now providing explicit international law prohibition on those weapons. So that's been a deeply disturbing issue for me, particularly for the organisation that I've been working in and want to feel proud about. And it's such complete odds with the stated goals of the university as an important social institution and in terms of its research purpose in particular to do good for people and planet, essentially.
Thanks, Tilman. We'll come back to some of those contradictions there, but Liz, you're also part of the. I've been told we've got bad audio on the Zoom, and we had hoped to sit this way, but for everyone,
the speakers to speak from the podium.
Sure.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I can be the first.
I know, so it might change actually, it might be a bit disjointed if I get you to sit up and back. So, how about, yeah, nice and loud, Liz. Yeah, let's
I can do that.
seated for this. So.
Okay, that's great. Okay, well, I feel like I come to this panel with a number of different parts of myself. Like spoiler alert, from all of those perspectives, I think it's highly unethical for the university to partner with weapons manufacturers. But as an academic at this university, I'm actually really concerned about the change that has happened in universities over the last 10 years. So one of the things that I don't think is really widely known is that the rapid acceleration of the militarization of universities has only happened since 2016, when there was a really significant shift in the Department of Defence. And over that time, we've seen the amount of money going from the Department of Defence in research contracts to universities go from zero in 2005 to over $150 million now. So there's a really fundamental shift happening in universities that is not being done transparently, and I think has huge implications for those of us who remain invested in the probably, slightly delusional, but still real ideal of universities as a place of, intellectual democracy. Also, as someone who researches settler colonialism and violence and bureaucracy, I guess I see
the violence in Gaza and the urgency of not being a part of that, to find all the ways we can to divest from that, but also recognising how that's connected to violence, genocide against Indigenous people here. And one of the really important things about the weapons manufacturing industry is that it's also involved in manufacturing non-lethal personnel control devices, right, policing devices that are used to suppress dissent and to, be involved in racialised policing of Indigenous people and minority groups everywhere. So we should be asking who's making the skidwoods that are being used to kill Aboriginal people in custody here. So we can't separate. This is an interconnected economy. And then the last kind of part, I suppose, of myself that I come to this from is as a Jewish person. I would see myself as an anti-racist Jewish person. And I think there's a really difficult atmosphere and environment that is being created in which it's very difficult to speak clearly about really important things, right? So that the kind of the weaponization of anti-Semitism, the conflation of criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism is quite harmful for these kind of conversations. So when student encampments are being held, that their primary demand is that the university should divest from weapons manufacturers, which is a reasonable demand, but they're being seen as a kind of locus of anti-Semitism. I think that does a lot of harm, not just to our ability to speak out. I think it's very dangerous for all kinds of racialised groups, including Jewish groups, who, if we weaken the definition and the meaning of anti-Semitism in that way.
Thanks, Liz. And we have been directed to come up to the lectern after this. So thank you, Hadrien. If you could come up, and Liz, we'll come back to some of those questions that touch on academic freedom as well as other points that have been raised. Welcome, Hadrien.
Thank you.
So we're getting a sense that we've got some strong perspectives about responses to this question. Can you share your position, Hadrien?
Yeah. And first of all, thank you to Sue and the rest of MAPW for organising the event and allowing HSCPW to be involved.
Yeah.
Look, I'm very honoured to be sharing the stage with these wonderful panellists, and I don't pretend that I'm an expert on this matter. I think for me, I just wanted to speak on behalf of a lot of young people, young students and young alumni who are very deeply concerned about the university's ties with these weapons manufacturers, and I guess aim to remind the university of its moral responsibility to promote peace and human rights. I fear that these ties with these weapons manufacturers may not only steer academic inquiry in directions that may align with these companies' interests, but perhaps more perniciously facilitate this militarization culture that Liz was talking about, and potentially even the desensitization of the use of these weapons. I think the integration of these companies into our most trusted institution, so-called of progress, tells young students and tells the rest of society more broadly that somehow these corporations that are responsible for fanning the flames of war somehow have our best interest at heart. And that's not to mention, the direct impact on students who will then go to become engineers and scientists and politicians who will be directly trained to aid and abet the industry of war. That's one aspect. And I guess the other aspect is to talk about this topic from a lens of health as a human right. This is something I guess that was impressed upon me and instilled in me on this very campus by someone who I actually shared the stage with tonight. And to put it bluntly, if the university has, assists these corporations in building these tools, whether willingly or, whether willfully or willfully ignorant, they are in a sense complicit in all of the health impacts, the death of civilians, the displacement of populations, the destruction of health infrastructure. and the immeasurable downstream impacts that war has on health. But in all of this, I don't wish to pretend to be an expert on the matter in how to manage a university, its programs or its finances. I guess I just wish to remind the university of its purpose, which is in a sense to building the values and the moral character of my generation and all those that will follow.
I might get you to just elaborate there, because how do you understand the purpose of the university and its ability to uphold its aspirations for future generations, given what you've just described of the impacts and the responsibility of the university in holding that?
Yeah, we were looking at some of the values and the purpose statements that the university has. And there's a couple that I'd like to share. They say to grow in the esteem of future generations is one, and another to benefit society through the transformative impact of education and research. Yeah. And I guess I and a lot of other people here tonight and a lot of people that I know struggle to reconcile these comments with the actions of the university. They cannot in one breath, proclaim these values and yet hold these ties with these weapons manufacturers. The only way that I can interpret this is that these are actually just empty, vacuous statements that the university makes for PR purposes. And I guess that's the bottom line of what's really transpired tonight, that, these universities know that these are the values they should be upholding, and yet do not, and hence in that contradiction they fail to make comments, or they fail to attend these debates, and they fail to stand up for their actions. And I guess if we can imagine maybe a truer value statement for how they've been acting, it would almost sound as if, our duty is to, pander to those who pay us and to the everlasting growth of this institution, which I doubt they would get, they would be able to recruit any students outside of maybe the School of Economics. But
well, just on that, what about the argument that we hear, and we hear, as Tilman said, very proud proclamations about the money that comes in to enable scholarships, especially in STEM, enable research programs of work, often with stated dual purpose. What's your perspective on what's at stake in relation to the benefits that are seen for students as well as research programs from within the university?
As in the benefits of these projects?
Yeah. So, like you said, there's an often stated understanding that there are benefits, wider benefits, not just for the economics students, but for the STEM and other programs of research that, as Liz mentioned, are increasingly significant. As a health graduate.
Yeah, I think, I'm sure potentially Tom might be able to talk better to this, but I don't see how that is a necessary, excuse for the sort of dichotomy, the dramatic dichotomy that these technologies have. I guess in any research, you're going to have, in medical terminology, there's this thing called equipoise, where you got to have some level of uncertainty in the benefit of a research subject in order to be able to research it. And I don't see how there's substantial, or there is even a modicum of equipoise when we know that the outcome of these tools, whether like inadvertently or not, is murder and the killing of individuals. I don't see how we can justify, the need for stimulating the stems through effectively the, creation of weapons of murder.
Thank you, Hadrien.
Oh, that's all right.
And on your suggestion, I'm going to ask Tilman to come up. So Tilman, I'd like to come back to this argument that the current relationships with companies that manufacture weapons is legal, and complies to ethical standards. So we've received a lot of public statements that say that the current arrangements, as you rightly say, that are not only with Lockheed and Martin, but with other weapons manufacturers or related partnerships with defence and otherwise, are compliant under Australian law and have strong due diligence frameworks that hold them to acceptable ethical standards as far as the university is concerned. How do you respond to that? What are the key tension points that you would highlight?
I think much has been cogently said already about the intrinsic conflict between honing, developing, refining more efficient weapons of war and the purpose of a university. It's not as if there aren't other places where work can be undertaken on the legitimate, technical requirements for policing and legitimate uses of military force under the UN Charter. There's a massive defence, science and technology establishment in the country that there are enough. These companies are huge enterprises with substantial capacity and funds. It's not as if the university is the only place where the tools for force for legitimate use could be developed. For the university, it's actually trivial amounts of money. The university says now that although it was initially claimed that the Lockheed Martin partnership was $13 million, there was a subsequent clarification that that was Lockheed Martin's investment in the centre, but the university had only received $3.5 million. $3.5 million in the scheme of things for this university with endowments in the billions is, why would you, from any kind of consideration point of view, why would you risk the ethical, the reputational, the goodwill downsides for a relatively trivial amount of money? And I think, unfortunately, the context here is really difficult, and I think something we all need to be alert to, because I fear that things will get substantially worse. Our military budgets are going up, dramatically. It's an untouched, it's the only part of the federal budget that doesn't get rigorous razor gang reviews. There's a lock-in agreed 3%, whatever the increase is per annum, and it's going greater than that. So it's now over $50 billion and sailing upwards. There is pressure from Commonwealth and state governments on universities to participate in the goal that Malcolm Turnbull really accelerated of Australia becoming a leading, one of the top 10 arms exporters in the world. There's a significant role that's foreshadowed and encouraged and funded for universities in that broader initiative, and particularly in the $368 billion projected AUKUS nuclear submarine project, which will require a very substantial workforce of scientists, engineers, technicians that we do not currently have, in which universities will need to play a very major role. And that the universities, some of them have been quite shamefully quick to try and scramble to be a part of, positioning themselves to receive sums of those funds. That's in the context where broader, more diverse public interest funds for universities are reducing, and universities have to go outside traditional public sources to companies and philanthropic organisations for an increasing proportion of their research funding in particular. So there's pressure on universities to be part of that. There's a lot of money at risk. There's a lot of political pressure from state and federal governments, and I fear that it will only get worse. But I think it's a very damaging long-term trend. It's a really unfortunate precedent And there is this inescapable nexus that it's largely the same large companies, Thales, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, BAE Systems. There's 20 or so of these major global companies that do everything from equipment used in policing to components of F-35s that drop massive explosive bombs on Gaza and civilian targets, and are involved in producing nuclear weapons.
And so, Tilman, this is reflective of a broader argument for the increase in allocations to defence and elsewhere, that it is in Australia's national interest to invest and grow its defence capabilities, that it's defensive and not offensive. What are the main ways in which you are you have been, because you've been talking about this for some time, this is in one part about the university's relationships, but also pushing against a wider trend. So what's your response or your perspective on the pushback to this trend that gets justified under the national interest?
I have to say, in my dealings with the university over the last 8 years about the Lockheed Martin partnership in particular, this claim that this is that the university supports and that this is part of university support for Australia's defence and national security is quite a recent addition. It really has just arisen in the last year or so, and it's touted as a kind of mantra that's really uncritical and simply stated without being unpacked or defined in any particular way, as if that was a known thing, a fixed thing that everybody understood or agreed on what the defence and national security of Australia is. There is no mention of more comprehensive visions of human security that encompass all of the other dimensions, nowhere to be seen in the research justification documents for participating in defence and national security. It's really, I think, a fig leaf that is dishonest in some ways, because it doesn't unpack what that means and where it might be appropriate to contribute to clearly desirable humanitarian goals versus, ones that are aggressive, that are out of line with the UN Charter, or that increase risks of military conflict. So I think it's quite a dishonest and superficial stance, which has been recently added to the arguments. Yes, it may be legal at present, but that's a real problem. And what's legal is not a fixed thing. This university has a history of being involved in some deeply racist work. Macfarlane Burnett, who is a proud, one of Australia's major biological scientists. I worked at the institution in Melbourne that bears his name. Did lots of good things, but he also advised the Australian government on how it could more effectively develop biological weapons for use in Asia, particularly depriving people of food sources. So there are there's some very dark things in the history of what's legal.
And does that
Australia
also
has a
go
position,
with our ethical standard?
yeah, and Australia has a position of, Australia has joined every other treaty that prohibits an inhumane and indiscriminate weapon: cluster munitions, landmines, biological and chemical weapons, blinding lasers. Australia is party to those, but not to the treaty that prohibits the worst of all weapons of mass destruction. What's legal changes over time, and it's critical that at an institution like a university, which needs to be a place of really deep and critical and open and safe examination of difficult issues, that we're not just bound by what's current government policy or what's currently, in narrow terms, legal.
Thank you, Tilman. Hadil, I might ask if you would happily come up. So we're just picking up off some of Tilman's points. Can you share a little bit about, as a university graduate, but also somebody who is touched more than others, on many of us, on this issue? Can you share your extension of what Tilman's raised in relation to perhaps the limits of this argument that universities have legal and ethical, are meeting their legal and ethical standards in relation to their partnerships with weapons manufacturers?
Yeah, so I guess when I hear the word legal and ethical nature of these partnerships, it just makes me laugh, because what's legal and ethical when the result of this research, when the outcome is like an obliteration of entire nations? Like, I can't see where's the compliance here with the standards of protecting human lives, with protecting human rights and preventing any abuse of these rights. And actually, I don't know where this came from, because I know like the national statement, the Australian national statement on like ethical conduct and human research in 2023 said that if there is a risk of harm to participants and non-participants to like by the weapons that been manufactured or produced, then all this research deemed to be unethical. So I can't see where's the ethical here. And I don't know, like when the university says that they comply with the Australian code for ethical conduct of research, when I look at the principles, and for example, the respect principle, respect for people, communities, environment, and which entails like minimizing any adverse effect of this research, and the other principle around accountability for undertaking and developing research, which again entails like considering all the possible consequences and outcomes of research. I was just wondering how the university responded to these principles and their ethical reviews that were done on this kind of research. Like, what did they say? How this research complied with these principles? Like, I didn't get it. And I guess and the other funny thing is the university prides themselves in trying to maintain the highest ethical and integrity standards when it comes to research, and we see it with like different research projects. But when it comes to this type of research, it just, as like Tilman said, there's no evidence. Like, they provided nothing. Like, there is no, like, where's the ethical reviews? What's the outcome? What's the details here? So like, this hypocrisy, this selective application of ethical standards is so disgusting.
Yeah. A lot of students and staff have tried to look into what is available in terms of understanding about the current projects, partnerships and relationships. Thinking more broadly, what's at stake in your opinion? Because when you also were talking about the complicit nature of engagement, when it is known that there are impacts. So there's a lot of also mention on what is publicly available about wider benefits of research and engagement. How does one respond to that?
Benefits?
This idea that there is, like you said, there is a lack of information about some of the nature of what are the ethical dimensions that have been considered and how they've been weighed and valued to proceed in the way that they have. But, as Tilman pointed out, there's also a type of language that says there are benefits to students, to the research community, dual purpose benefits and benefits to and wider benefits to society?
Yeah, I guess like the non-military benefits that they keep referring to, I guess they weigh nothing when we look at the destructive impact of this research on human beings. Like, it's still, like, I mean, I acknowledge there could be benefits for, you know, for this research for non-military purposes. But the thing is, this industry or this research is not regulated at all. Like, there's no rules, there's no regulations, there's no accountability structures that can control the use of these weapons, which is scary and dangerous. And all the things that, the horrifying things that we're seeing today is because of this, because we're justifying this like not regulated business or research. And I can give an example about this technology and the military or non-military benefit, which is, we all know about the drones technology and how it was developed and created to help first responders to locate and, you know, like help people who are trapped in bushfires, for example. Like, when I hear stories from my family or friends about how these same technology, same drones used to surveillance them, used to shoot at them with these like cameras, it's like stream live, sent by soldiers to people's houses, get through the windows or like open doors, and just hovering over them, they see them, these are civilians, these are unarmed people, these are children playing. They just see them and shoot at them. And they know these are civilians. But they did that because there's no consequences. There's no accountability. They know that they can do this and get away with this. So, like, you talk about benefits, but it's nothing. Like, I don't see any benefit, even if there's any. It just is still the destructive consequences outweigh these benefits. And as long as we don't have any controlling or any regulations, I don't think we should be allowed to invest in such research.
Thank you, Hadil. Liz, there's another argument that we've been offered repeatedly, which is about academic freedom. Yeah. Mm. So are we saying that we should have the ability to deny academic freedom to some researchers, academic students, at the expense of others?
Yeah, so I think it's often put forward as if academics are kind of choosing these pathways out of pure research goals. And I think actually the bigger concern for academic freedom is the way that research funding has changed over the past 40 years as the university's basically been neoliberalized and defunded by the government, so that more and more research is being pushed into industry, ready partnerships, into kind of impact. And what that means is that in order to get research grants, you need funding from industry partners who own part of the intellectual property and set the agenda of the research. So when it comes to something like this massive increase in military investment, which is not just a few like dodgy companies like Lockheed Martin, it's supported by defense strategic papers, it's supported by the government. There are all kinds of state level alliances. It's been labelled by Sian Troth the military industrial academic complex, in that there are private companies, weapons manufacturers, government departments and universities all partnering to try to kind of work together to set research agendas. And there's even in one of those defence strategic papers a quite disturbing kind of realpolitik from the defence industry, realising that universities are in a kind of strapped position, including especially after COVID. And so that, you know, the defence, that's an opportunity for defence to leverage their role and relationship with universities in order to kind of extract intellectual benefits. So in terms of academic freedom, I feel like it's the opposite. Academics are no longer in these contexts choosing to follow their intellectual direction, but they're actually being more and more structurally pushed to do what it is being demanded of them by corporations, as the university itself becomes a corporation. And obvious, yeah.
And would you say that's been, has that or hasn't it been a feature as well of the university's response, for example, to student encampment or to other types of, like, how do we understand some of the discussions that we're having, and for this panel, I'm trying to also use questions that obviously reflect what the university and other statements have shared. But once we're talking about the industrial militarised university complex, what are some of the ways in which are responses from within the university that are counter to that push are being received?
Yeah, so I think there's a current moment that's very intense, but there's a much longer trend in universities, which is that as universities become more and more corporatized and are looking for more and more external funding, they're also becoming less and less sort of democratically governed, I suppose. Like the ideal of universities, and universities have always been problematic institutions, racist institutions, we can't sort of idealize them, but in some sense, you know, 40 years ago and prior to that, they were governed by academics. People had a say in the governance, there was a degree of transparency, and there's been a real shift, I think. So it's harder and harder to speak up against the kind of interests of the university. The code of conduct, you know, is asking us to always think about the university's interests, we always have to have an eye to kind of research funding and not upsetting research partners. So there's a bigger context, I think, but then we're also seeing a really disturbing politicization of the discussion at the moment, and I think a real targeting of universities. I should be clear, I'm only speaking for myself here. I'm not speaking for all Jewish colleagues or anything, but especially from the LNP, from the coalition, a very clear push to target universities as kind of sites of dissent. And I had that experience when I testified to the inquiry on anti-Semitism on campus, and was kind of, as member of the Jewish Council, absolutely slammed by the LNP senators there, that there is a kind of right-wing push to really target universities as a locus of dissent that I think should be concern to everyone. Yeah.
And you're touching back on something else that was raised, which is what Tilman and Hadil and Hadrien, as well as yourself, have touched on, which is some of the ways in which the resistance or the counter arguments, while we're talking about a debate, to these issues are often diminished quite quickly as a quick response to the ways that they're delivered, or the idea of protest, or the idea of not a substantive engagement in the actual questions and issues. And Tilman, you mentioned as well that you're very disappointed in that sort of response and engagement. And I think for students as well, you're also touching on the diversity of some of those experiences. And I'm just aware that we're going to move into the Slido question time. But Liz, what are things that perhaps are ways in which you're countering that type of resistance? What are the ways to that you might put forward for example, on this issue of influencing policy and research within the university context?
So
I'm putting you on the spot
Yeah,
because I'm thinking like whilst as an academic staff member, as somebody engaging, where does it leave? Where does it leave you?
I feel like as academics, we all need to be a bit braver. The university manufactures a kind of anxiety amongst academics about our positions. And I feel like we actually do have a degree of power. We shouldn't leave it to the students, who are often speaking up most clearly, to demand of the university transparency. Like in the first instance, almost all of these deals are not being made in discussion with people. They're not going through the sort of intense ethics processes that individual academics would be subject to. And so just demanding more and more disclosure and transparency, I think that all of these kind of quite superficial arguments about the national interest and things start to crumble quite quickly when the facts actually become clear about the nature of these partnerships.
Thank you, Liz. And just to our panelists, is there something you're sitting with that you want to share or comment on from what's being shared before we open to our question? Hadrien, thank you.
I just think it's a really short one, but I think bouncing off what Liz has been saying, it's not unprecedented that universities have stood up against corporate interests. I'd just like to raise it, like in the past, there has been a strong rejection of any kind of funding or investments from the tobacco industry, in the same vein that their research was leading to the death of unnamed number of people. And I just thought that was an interesting precedent to raise as to sort of mirror what is potentially happening in the same sort of vein tonight. Yeah.
Thank you. Are you happy for me to, you want to ask some of our Slido questions? You might want to come up, Guy, or
So,
yes, sure.
So we just have quite a lot of questions, and thank you everyone for the engagement. How do you respond to those who say we need to have a defence force equipped with enough modern weaponry to protect our citizens? And maybe here are not important. What do you say to those arguments?
So who would like to answer that question? What do you say to those that say we need a well-equipped defence force? Tilman touched on this. You might want to expand, or Liz, or Thanks, Tilman.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable proposition, but I don't think it requires university involvement directly. And I think, for me, the simplest way to look at this is, who you're getting into bed with. There's a terrific old saying about if you're going to sup with the devil, you need a very long spoon. In this case, it would actually be better to choose a different dinner partner. But in terms of the length of the spoon, it seems to me fairly fundamental that entities that are involved in producing and profiting from weapons that are illegal under international law, banned by international treaty, that are clearly indiscriminate and inhumane as defined by the Red Cross and the World Health Organization, that apply, lethal autonomous systems if they come, that are weapons of mass destruction. There's no question that they are not fit collaborators for a university. End of story.
Thank you, Tilman. Thanks for that question to the audience. Alison? Yeah, that's helpful.
Just to read it from the podium. So another question is there evidence that the more a country manufactures weapons, the more accepting they are of wars that require their weapons?
Thanks, Liz.
Question. So
Yeah.
it's like the more a country manufactures weapons, the more normalized it becomes, and the more there's an economic interest, I suppose, in selling those weapons. And there's some incredibly good research on this, for example, in relation to Palestine. Anthony Lowenstein wrote a book called The Palestine Laboratory, which is about the fact that the oppression of that group and the trialing of weapons, the development of new strategies of control built an international weapons industry, which then went out internationally looking for sites to sell. So of course there's an economic imperative that it probably goes both ways. The more weapons you manufacture, of course, the more conflicts you look for, but the more violence that you are perpetrating in the place where you are, the more you will develop weapons and then connect with other places that are enacting those forms of violence.
Let's stay there for a sec. I might get a couple of you to answer this one. What can ordinary citizens do about the abandonment of governments of funding universities adequately?
Yes. Well, this is like the alternative to blood money. It's public money, and that is the ideal. I feel like the defunding of universities has happened very quietly and without a lot of public outcry, but it's more and more clear, especially to students who realize they're commodities, right, and are experiencing universities in that way, that if we can somehow put pressure on the government to fund universities more adequately, or force them in other ways to stop doing this. So one thing I meant to say before, but it didn't come up, which is that I don't think a lot of these partnerships are actually legal in the context of international law and the decisions of the International Criminal Court, that actually specific universities and even individuals in universities might be criminally liable. And some of these cases are moving through courts in other countries and are having impacts on universities and governments. So yeah.
Thank you.
Just saying.
And Tilman, do you want to add there?
Slightly lateral, but I think it may be of interest. There's just some numbers from SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, about where Australia sits and where Australia is heading. Australia is 1/3 of 1% of the world's population, right? Really small. Our military expenditure, so we're 55th in population in country terms. Our military expenditure is 1.3% of the global total. So we're ranked 13th. So it's more than 4 times proportionately greater than our population. And it's going upward. It's doubled real military expenditure since 2001. And in terms of exports, we're actually number 16 in the world at arms exports. This is over the period 2019 to 2023. And for imports, we're number 8. Like, we're serious about weapons here. You know, we're preparing for war. That's what they're for.
Just on that, before you go, Tilman, so in addition to the increases in expenditure over the last quarter century, we saw a depletion of more than half of our overall Commonwealth allocations to diplomacy and aid. A very different pattern. What one of the questions for you was, do you have a theory as to why the university is risking its ethical position for such a trivial amount of money?
That's a really good question. I think it's lack of courage and pressure of governments. And as Liz has been really eloquently outlining, this whole sort of corporatisation of the role of the university, it's no longer a public university, this one. It's a public-spirited university, whatever that is. It's a business. It's run like a business. You know, it's not primarily focused as clearly and strongly on its social mandate as a cultural and educational resource of huge importance, as a place for debate. And yeah, I think it's part of this much larger context of corporatisation of the institution and the militarisation of the country, and basically being beholden to power, both economic and political.
Thanks, Tilman. Question, Hadrien or Hadil, how can we, and this is inclusive not just of staff and students, but alumni, best pressure the university to stop working with weapons manufacturers? As Liz and Tilman noted, it's our students have been the most courageous and front. Want to come up? Yeah.
Just, I don't know, like I feel since last year, a lot of activities organized by the students to pressure the university to cut ties with these weapons companies. But I don't know, like, I don't know if this is effective. I'm being a bit less optimist, but it just maybe like keeping up on doing this might like cause make a change, because I feel like it's a hard fight and it's a long fight, and we need to keep the momentum up and strong, because when money and power involved, it's even more difficult. So we just need to keep doing what we're doing, and I don't know, go further. I don't know how. Maybe just boycott universities. Like, I don't know what else to do. But I guess we like for the one thing for sure that we can't do is to stay silent and to be okay. Oh, we can't do anything, so just stay out of it and just witness this, because we can't do this. We have to do something, even if it's small, minor, but keep like speaking up, doing actions is what will get us there at some point in the future.
Thanks, Hadil. And Hadrien, did you want to add your thoughts to this question?
Yeah, I think we have to appreciate the leverage that students have to some extent in the decision making of the universities. I think there's been a lot of discussion about the fact that these universities are increasingly run like a business, and the reality is a lot of their income stream, although potentially from industries and other, is still from the student base. And I think in that sense, there is some element of democratization in, unfortunately, the capitalization of the university, where the influencing of student behaviors can still impact the university. And if students increasingly voice their disdain for universities' behavior, I think there has been evidence that it has had positive impact. I think we're starting to see that in the divestment slowly and surely, although not perfectly, from fossil fuel industries, and in the past in many other instances. And I know there's a big historical one where the American universities divested from apartheid in South Africa. I think we just have to appreciate that we still do have some form of say in this, and we can influence the university's decision makers if we just make a loud enough statement.
Thank you, Hadrien. And Hadrien, just if I can ask a question that's on Slido, that you might have a reflection on, but why do most medical journals exhibit bias and selectivity in their coverage of civilian casualty statistics during wartime? It might be interesting, did you ever, like, is it something you were conscious of, or?
I was not. I mean, there's a lot of increasing acknowledgement of the colonial and industrial biases that these journals have, and so it's not like it's of surprise to me, because I think much like the university, these journals are also beholden to investors and financiers, and so I suspect there's a lot of silencing or even, you know, manipulation of the results in order to abide by the interest of those people who pay them. So it's not at all surprising. I didn't know that was a thing, but it doesn't surprise me one bit.
Thanks, Hadrien. So I just want to check with Alison and Guy. Are you happy with that? Wonderful. I just, as we're coming to Sue's time to provide some thoughts and reflections, I just want to acknowledge the great generosity in which you've been sharing your thoughts and positions, and the courage with which you not only share those but continue to work constructively and with those cumulative impacts that Hadil refers to. As Sue said, we haven't had a traditional debate in the sense that we haven't had an affirmative voice, and as you would have noticed, I've been trying to frame the questions in a way that speak to some of the main messages that we've been hearing in support and in justification of the current arrangements. But there are just strong, it's just so much that you have also shared and reflected on from your positions and perspectives. And I'm just going to ask Sue if you would like to come up and share some of your thoughts and perhaps some reflections to bring that discussion together.
Thank you very much, Tanya, and to all the panel. I personally thought that discussion was just fabulous. I got a lot out of it. Each and every one of our speakers coming from a different perspective, so much useful reflection there and important information that we haven't necessarily come across before. So I'm not going to try to capture it all. There was too much there, but we've heard from the concerns of young people about what their university or universities generally represent. We've heard the concerns, the deep concerns from communities who are directly impacted by the products of the companies that universities are engaging with. We've heard about the military culture, which is increasing in Australia in terms of military spending and the heavy influence of the Defence Department in many areas. We've heard a little about this term national interest, which we hear a lot about. What does national interest mean? Who gets to define it? And what about human security as distinct from national security? We heard a little about the issue of legality. If a partnership or sponsorship or whatever is legal, and if it seems to comply with guidelines, is that sufficient to make it okay? And we've had the question posed, maybe some of these relationships between universities and weapons companies are not in fact lawful under international law. Interesting question. And how do universities' practices stack up against what they actually say about themselves, their values? On the issue of dual use research, which again we hear quite a lot about, a valuable perspective asking, well, how important is it to have dual use research when part of that dual use is the production of products which cause so much devastating harm to people around the world? How can that possibly be balanced by other benefits? And finally, I think the important message is that we mustn't stay silent on this, no matter what our view is. I think we've got a pretty good idea of the panelists' view, and I suspect a lot of us in this audience would agree with that. But regardless of what we think about this issue, it's important enough to discuss transparently. And Our purpose this evening was simply to urge much greater scrutiny of this issue on the part of the universities and the general public, because given the harms that the products of weapons companies create, this issue is important and it needs to be discussed, and it needs to be discussed transparently. So this event this evening is certainly and absolutely not an end in itself. We need to have a lot more events, occasions like this, where these issues are aired. We know that many people within universities around the country have been very active on this, and particularly students, as we heard. I almost mentioned at the beginning also that we have had support for this particular event from a number of very senior academics from around the country who agree that this issue is important and it needs to be discussed, and universities should be prepared to discuss this openly and transparently. Just a quick final thought, and this is reflecting back on Bill Williams and the work of ICANN, and the way ICANN achieved pretty magnificent results was to focus the discussion on the human impacts of nuclear weapons. It was getting away from military strategy and all of that. It was just talking about what do these things do to people and to the environment, and that was when the conversation really became impossible to ignore for those who wanted to ignore it. So I would like to extend extremely sincere thanks to our panel, to Hadrien, Moffroid, to Liz, Strakosch, to Tilman, Ruff, and Hadil Albarqi, and of course to Tanya Miletic, who has guided our discussion so beautifully this evening. It's been a very valuable part of this ongoing discussion. From MAPW, I would also like to thank the team at Melbourne Uni who have helped put this event together. We couldn't have done it without you. So sincere thanks to all of you who have done that. I'd like to thank all the audience for coming, those of you here and those online, and to urge again that this event is not an end in itself. And I urge you all to keep this discussion going wherever you can. If you can write something for a publication about this, either about this event or about the issue, please do that. Please talk with others about it, and please take every opportunity to keep this issue alive, and also to support others who are busily working away at this, and there are a lot of them at this university. Support others who are doing good stuff. So I would like you all in closing to give a round of applause as a token of sincere thanks to our panel this evening. So thank you all very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of the evening, and I hope we'll see you all another time. Thank you.